Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to give attendees one more minute to hop on and get started. All right, let's begin today's session. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Hope you're each having a great day. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. My name is Colleen Berry. I'm the Marketing Director at Burwood Group, and I will be your host for today's webinar. So let's go ahead and dive right into our topic. Today's topic for the next hour is Google Cloud Readiness, 6 simple steps to effective onboarding. Burwood Group is thrilled to partner with Prime TSR on this session. Just a little bit about our firms. Burwood is an IT consulting and integration firm headquartered in Chicago with offices and employees across the U.S., and we help our clients leverage the cloud to transform their infrastructure environments. And with Prime TSR, who is an expert in digital transformation, cloud, and IT strategy, we've planned a lively discussion for today, really focusing on the critical steps you'll want to work through to make sure that your Google Cloud relationship and environment begin on the best foot possible. So before we jump in, I'd like to remind you all that this is the second of a 4-part series on application modernization with Google Cloud. As you can see, our first one, we focused on app modernization, benefits, and differentiators. If you missed that session, please check out Burwood Group's YouTube channel. You can catch it right there. And if you enjoyed today's session, we really think we'd love to see you on the next 2 very closely related topics. So check out the August 5th and 19th sessions as well. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. We have 1 hour for this session, and we are recording right now. So a recorded version will be sent out to all of you after the session, as well as the PowerPoint slides. And if you have any questions throughout, we'd love to make this interactive. So please use the chat or QA window on the right side of your WebEx browser, and we'll get to as many as we can. And then once we complete the presentation, we'll answer any leftover questions. If we have time, we can unmute some lines. We'll see how it goes and how we move through the content. So without further ado, let's go ahead and meet our presenters. I'd like to introduce Rich from Prime TSR and Ed from Burwood. They'll introduce themselves and then dive right into some poll questions and the agenda. Ed, please take us away.
Excellent. Thanks for the introduction, Colleen. I'm Ed Keane. I run the Cloud and DevOps group at Burwood. Rich?
Oh, yep. So my name is Rich Kopakin. I run the GCP practice and also the application development practice at Prime TSR, as well as play around in a lot of the clouds that there are out there. There's a lot today. So to get going, we have 2 polls just to find out more about who you guys are now that Ed and I have introduced ourselves. First of all, we'd like to know which group do you represent in IT. I have an application development background. I believe, Ed, you're doing more infrastructure and application development as well. So, you know, I'm always curious to find out who is part of Google Cloud. So those poll questions should be up on your right if you see them. And then you can flip to the next poll. And here again, which workloads are you running with your current in your current organization? You know, as organizations are moving to the cloud, multi-cloud and hybrid efforts are becoming a lot more common these days. So to see, you know, I think I read a statistic recently that 90% of organizations have at least adopted one cloud. So I'd be interested to see if there are organizations here who don't have any at all. But I'm also very curious to see if you have, you know, 2 or more as well. So, Ed, how about you go into the agenda for today?
Absolutely, and minor technical glitch. It turns out that this question, while we want it to be check all that apply and a multi-select, actually in WebEx it's just a single select. So if you want to choose the primary provider who's running your workloads, like your cloud workloads, that would be great. So that way we get an idea as to which one you're primarily running in. If you're running in a few, then hey, post them in the chat. We'd love to just see them in the chat. We can monitor them coming in the chat. So just let us know where are you running your workloads today. Post them in the chat. That'd be great. Then a little bit about our background. Do you want to go first, Rich?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned before, I'm Prime TSR's primary running our application development practice and our GCP practice. I've been in the game for about 15 years, doing IT consulting for about the past 10 years. 4 years ago, I joined Prime TSR because they promised me the opportunity to work on all the latest and greatest in cloud technologies, and surprisingly, they weren't lying to me. I've had the opportunity to work on Azure, AWS, and GCP in the past 4 years, both hands-on projects as well as application and solution architecture. So I've just been extremely lucky, I feel like, with the projects that have been presented to me. But in the last few years, I've mostly been doing architecture for our enterprise clients, as well as just learning everything I can and talking and evangelizing everything I can about GCP, which is what brings me here today. So, Ed, how about your backstory?
Yeah, and I've been primarily working for software companies with some stints in consulting along the way. My background's more on the infrastructure side and kind of infrastructure / DevOps side. I've been involved in cloud and getting hands-on with cloud since probably 2012 with AWS, and then running a large cloud infrastructure, all doing infrastructure as code, probably back with Microsoft Azure back in 2015. And most recently, over the last couple of years, doing a lot with Google Cloud. So really excited to be here to basically share the lessons that we've learned at Burwood over the last couple of years with ramping people up on Google Cloud, giving you some very tangible steps, like next steps to take with. And we've kind of broken it into these 6 distinct steps for a successful cloud onboarding. So quick heads up, get your polls in. They're going to be closing soon. They're going to be, sorry, that was a WebEx pop-up. They're going to be closing soon. And the 6 steps to a successful Google Cloud onboarding. So we're going to start with organization. Then we're going to get into billing. There's some nuances between how both of these are handled in Google versus some of the other cloud providers. Some good nuances that provide you functionality that you don't get with the other cloud providers. Then we'll talk about networking, getting that foundation in place, security, operations. We've got an operations checklist, making sure that you're ready for running production workloads. And then we'll start the conversation around automation, and this will carry on into the next session. So the polls should be closed now, and we should be able to see the results. So it looks like primarily from what group people are in, the front runner is IT, followed by product development, software engineering, and security. So those are the front runners. And then where are you running your workloads today? Most folks are either in a data center. Actually, there's a good spread between data center, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. So an even spread there. I don't see anything in the chat where people are posting multiple cloud providers there. So we'll just assume that there's probably a good spread across them all. So to get started, the best place that we found to get started on your Google Cloud onboarding journey is with your organization setup. What we're going to talk about here are some of the fundamentals, some of the with what Google Cloud provides, give you details and next steps on what you need to set up in your organization. If you're either going through a Google Cloud onboarding for the first time and you're bringing Google Cloud to your company, or maybe you've been running for a couple of years and maybe there are some best practices that you'll be able to take away here and kind of true up any discrepancies and close any gaps as well. So we're going to talk about identity management, how that works in Google, user provisioning, how you're going to get your users into your identity management tool, the role of super admins, folders and projects, which is a concept specific to Google, organization policies, and then roles and groups. The 3 A's of controlling access. So authentication, authorization, and then auditing. In Google Cloud, authentication is handled by Google Cloud Identity. We'll talk a little bit more about authorization in a minute, and then we'll talk about logging and audit, the role of logging and auditing at the end. So Google Cloud Identity is Google's identity as a service solution. So this is what Google uses to authenticate users to Google Cloud services and also into G Suite as well. So if you're already using G Suite, you're already using Cloud Identity. It can also be used for third-party applications like SAML and LDAP-based third-party applications as well. If you're going through Google Cloud, getting Google Cloud set up for the first time, you will set up Cloud Identity. In doing so, there's a number of options in how to get your users into Cloud Identity. So you can either create them manually, you can do a bulk upload through CSV. There's third-party tools like Okta, Ping that provide integrations. These are great if you're already using them. If not, they can be expensive. The best and most recommended option here, at least from our experience with a couple of dozen Google Cloud customers, is to use Google Cloud Directory Sync. So this is an LDAP integration. There's a one-way synchronization from your LDAP system into Google Cloud Identity. So it's best practice from being like a single source of truth, and it's pretty easy and straightforward to set up. Google has a recommendation of running it in a dedicated machine on-premise, kind of just like most software companies do when they say they just want to run it dedicated. Forgot to say, if you have any questions as we go through this, there's a chat function here as well within WebEx, so you can post any questions to Rich and I, and we can jump in and add them whenever we have chance to.
And Ed, I just wanted to jump in here real quick.
Yeah, absolutely, Rich.
Yeah. I did want to highlight, as you already did, that there's so many different options, and I was impressed with what I learned about Google to keeping your identity system in sync, and Google's identity system in sync. I know obviously they have a lot of SSO options, but there are also a lot of not only Google tools, but third-party tools to make sure, hey, if you're updating a role or a user information in one system, to automatically have that sync between the two systems, it works like magic. And like you said, it's no programming required, just some configuration setup. And anyway, that was one of the things that really stood out to me when I was first learning about Google, that how easy and how many tools were available to set up. And Prime TSR is using a lot of those tools as well to keep our systems, our access and systems in sync.
Exactly, being able to sync like not just users but groups as well. And to Rich's point on what tools you're using, like there's every single one of these sections has some area of like discovery and requirements gathering. So every organization is different. Maybe you're using on-premise Active Directory or Azure AD or a third-party tool like Grouper. So these are key questions for you to take back to your team in order to understand, like, what's the best, is GCDS the best tool for you, or are you already using a third party that you can just integrate with? And to Rich's point, maybe that third party tool does more than just sync the users and groups, and there's additional functionality you're going to get from it as well. Speaking of third parties, like, obviously a best practice is to leverage like your SSO provider if you have one already, and ideally you'd be enforcing 2FA, MFA through your SSO provider as well. So with your foundation in place and your users in place, now we need to determine a couple of super admins. So these are the break glass accounts that really hold the keys to the kingdom. So the best practices around setting these up. So first of all, they are break glass accounts. So our recommendation would be to not use this as your regular login, kind of very similar, treat it to like your domain admin. So only log in with this account when you need to perform some role or function that requires this account. So because of the heightened level of access that it has, we recommend enforcing MFA and really consider using like a physical security key for this account as well. Make sure you've got the account recovery option set up. Like I said, use a separate account, and you really want to restrict this to a couple, so more than one, so you have some redundancy, but really a handful of like key administration management, like cloud management roles at your organization. This is not something that you'd want to give to everybody, or even necessarily like everybody in IT. Now, Google has a slightly different organization structure from what other cloud providers have. I'm just going to give a very quick walkthrough of what that looks like. So at the top here, we've got our organization. Then beneath our organization, we can have actually 0 or more folders. And folders can be nested up to 10 deep as well. So folders are great like virtual containers for storing projects. So within a folder, you can have 0 or more projects. And so then projects are where your resources sit. So organization has 1 or more folders or 0 or more folders. Folders have projects, and then projects are where the resources are. So projects are the right way of being able to kind of separate, compartmentalize, separate off your resources from one another. So projects, their key role is containing resources and providing an identity and access management enforcement point. So you can provide specified permissions at the project level very easily as well. You can get more granular than that, but a pretty typical approach is by managing permissions at the project level. Projects are easy to provision, and they're free of charge. We'll talk more about how to provision them through automation a little bit later on. Here's an example architecture. I hope that my WebEx window isn't in the way here, but here's an example architecture where at the top here we've got our organization, so acme.com, and this is where our cloud IAM applies, so our identity and access management. Within here, we've got a number of folders, and within our folders, then we've got our projects. So in this case, like here, maybe under human resource, human HR, I've got my human HR, my HR GCP project. And then we can have like 1 or more environments or distinct workloads in the projects. So the projects will contain our resources. So these are the resources running within these projects. This is just an example of like a typical architecture that we'll see.
And one thing, if I jump in here as
Absolutely.
well, to highlight, as I love that you did that. Projects are really the best practice that Google preaches is, use your projects very, create as many as you can almost. As you have dev, stage, and prod here, I mean, that's definitely 1 project per environment, per application. Even so, if you have 5 applications, you should have at least 15 different projects running, one project for each one per each environment, to really break these things down, as well as in the folder level, to control access management through the 2.
Exactly. And actually, we'll talk about the project automation that would just make it easy to provision the projects and to be able to do that, separate off environments by project. So once you've got your projects in place and some resources in place, then we need to talk about authorization, so IAM policies. At the bottom here, we've got our resources. So access to resources is provided through IAM roles. So again, identity and access management roles. Roles can either be assigned directly to users or to a group or to like a service account. And then users and groups, users and service accounts can belong to a group and then pick up their roles from the group membership, which is obviously a best practice, much easier to manage with groups. We'll talk more a little bit later on about some best practices around roles and creating custom roles as well. So the next step is billing. And the reason why we go into billing is it's a little bit different, managed differently in Google Cloud than it is in Azure and AWS. Actually, Google provides some really nice capabilities for managing billing, separating off billing for different workloads and departments to make it very easy to charge back and run all sorts of great reporting as well. So the first new concept that you'll be introduced to as part of Google Cloud is this idea of a billing account. So a billing account, like an organization can have one or more billing accounts. Actually, even individual users can have their own billing account. So if you sign up for a new Google Cloud account, you will most likely get your own billing account and probably like $300 worth of credits if you're using like your non-organization account. So these billing accounts, they're what's used for managing the billing within projects. So a project can belong to one billing account. And one billing account can have one or more projects assigned to it. So any billing that I incur within my project here is going to go back to this billing account. Same with this project, and same with this one. So it all goes back into my centralized billing account. And then this is either probably has a credit card tied to it or tied to a purchase order and centralized invoicing. Billing accounts can be manually added when either when a new project is created or after the fact you can change the billing account for projects. But we highly recommend using automation and this project factory that we'll talk more about later on for making sure that you're tying a billing account to projects automatically when you create them through automation. Some best practices around billing are to use the project factory, but also to export to BigQuery as well. So BigQuery is Google's large managed service for big data workloads like SQL structured data, big data workloads. It's incredibly easy to use and to hit the ground running with. And so Google provides a very easy to set up billing export where you can set up a new BigQuery data set and go into your billing account, set up the export here, hit save, and then Google will every hour or so automatically export all your billing data from the billing account into BigQuery. So then it's in BigQuery and it will be in there indefinitely, so you can maintain an indefinite history here and write your own queries and visualizations around that data. Another good practice is to use labels here as well. So labels are simply like key value pairs. In this case, as an example, we've got a label for my cost center and a label for my team. So if I want to charge back, it makes it very easy I charge this back to this cost center and back to this team as well. Now, we built at Burwood, we built our own Google Cloud billing portal to provide like additional functionality that isn't available in Google Cloud's console. So this is like additional analytics info, like billing analytics visibility, additional custom reporting as well, so people can create custom reports, budgeting and alerting. I'll talk about it in a minute. We wanted to be able to do role-based access so users could view all the billing for their project that they're assigned to or for their department or for the whole organization, rather than being able to see the billing data for all of the projects that are linked to a billing account. So this makes it much easier to manage like billing account sprawl. We wanted people to be able to manage like billing requests that come in so they can create new requests, manage their existing requests, and integrate this into ServiceNow. A lot of our customers use ServiceNow, so being able to integrate like this ticketing system into ServiceNow as well. And then do so with like single sign-on too. So for the budgets and alerts, these are a great practice to set up. You can set them up in the Google Cloud console, or you can set them up here in Burwood's portal. What we're looking at here is where we've got simple view of where we're at for our budgets for each of our projects that we're managing here. So we can see the green bar is like This is empty budget space, and the reason is because we're coming closer to the budget too. A good practice is to obviously set escalating frequencies for your thresholds, and within the Burwood portal, like we're able to do like people can keep on top of where they're at very easily, and we can delegate reporting and alerting to like project owners and department owners as well. Another cool thing that you can do through Google's API that we've been able to build into our portal is the ability to automatically suspend a project, maybe when it reaches the end of that budget, or to change the billing accounts. So we do a lot with organizations who have credits, like they're getting credits from Google or from other sources, and maybe when a project is at the end of that credit, we flip it over to like a purchase order billing account, and that can all happen automatically through the APIs.
Yeah, and this is really cool. I actually wasn't aware that you guys had this functionality, but this is impressive. One of the kind of fortunate for us, but unfortunate in general, themes out there that we run across a lot with our clients is all of a sudden they have this gigantic cloud bill, couple $1 million, depending on the size, a month, a year, and they're like, where did this come from? What do we do about it? And oftentimes it's because they don't have a portal like this or alert set up. And, it's good for us as consultants. We get to come in there and, do a deep analysis and tell them what they could get rid of. And then we set up all these alerts, obviously, but really best practices, as you said, is to put these in place to begin with and have, a cool tool like this to do it, especially that's really impressive, the ability to switch between subscriptions, when credits run out and things like that.
Exactly. It's very much driven by feedback from customers as well. So because of the extensibility of Google Cloud, like we're able to build all sorts of automation in here. Other things that we're talking about doing right now is webhook alerts into Slack, and even actually integrating some dialogue flow into Slack as well, so that people can query what's the how close to reaching my budget am I for my project, and doing sort of dialogue flow through Slack. So yeah, very, very cool to see what we're able to build on top of Google Cloud. So you've got your organization structure in place, you've got your billing in place now. Like, great, I'm ready to start building. Where should we start? Well, let's start with the networking design. We'll have a look at like what our networking needs are, talk very briefly about like some of the Google Cloud network concepts, and then leave you with some tangible best practices around VPCs. Networking is a very large subject, and especially within cloud network designs as well. So it really starts with like the key considerations and understanding what you're going to need. Are you going to need hybrid and on-premise connectivity and a connectivity back? And Google has I'm not going to go too far that we could spend all session on networking, but Google has a number of different options to connect back to on-premise, like Cloud VPN. You could do like a dedicated interconnect, and even within there's a couple of different options for depending on what your performance needs are as well. There's cross-project communication as well as another consideration. So Rich and I mentioned like the ability to use projects to separate out different workloads, maybe different environments. You can have a separate project for your production environment from your dev environment. Hey, will there ever need to be cross-project communication as well? Are you going to need DNS between your resources in Google Cloud back to on-premise and vice versa? Maybe you already have a third-party security appliance like a Palo Alto. Like, okay, what role does that Palo Alto play in here? Do I want to route all my traffic through that Palo Alto, or just certain traffic? And then another consideration here is like remote access to VPN. So how are users going to connect into not VPNs, remote access to VMs? How are users going to connect into to VMs? Do you want them to be able to do so across the public internet? Do you want to use something like Google's Cloud Identity Aware Proxy? Or do you want to simply lock it all off and use like a VPN and a Bastion host, for example? So there's a lot that you'll unpack with like getting into the requirements gathering and some of the key considerations here. Like, Rich, is there anything you'd add around some of the networking side here?
I would say that Google has one of the fastest networks of all the cloud. If you really, really need that speed and leverage all of their networking capabilities, like their interconnect, where you're connecting basically directly to Google and not going through the public internet. You could really push just hundreds of gigabytes a second, really. And I was very impressed with, again, all the options that they provide, both through Google directly and third party. It's interesting whether or not you could have connections set up specifically if you're using G Suite and not using any Google Cloud services, or if you're using Google Cloud Platform and developing applications for it. There's a lot of different types of connections out there specifically for those scenarios. And again, Google's got it covered.
Excellent. There's a question that came in from the chat. So is there a way to slow things down, like to rate limit traffic coming through? I would imagine that, so I'm curious what you think, Rich, but from my perspective, like I'm sure that there'd be like a third-party router that you could route all the traffic through, a rate limit through that. That's what comes to my mind, unless you get any other ideas.
Yeah, the two things come to my mind. The first one, kind of like a router, a load balancer in front. The cloud load balancers are designed to be extremely elastic, so that regardless of how much is coming in, you could absorb it. They also have protections against attacks if you're talking about the amount of just in case someone's doing like a DDoS attack or something like that. The other thing that comes to mind is using like a pub sub, because that's what really, putting in front of all your requests is meant to do, so that in case you're hitting something too fast or consuming data too quickly, you could then absorb that, at the pace that you want, at the pace that your system wants. If this is from a cost perspective, I know that they definitely have metrics and thresholds that you can essentially scale things down or slow things down based on the number of incoming requests. If it's from, a security concern or just a system performance concern, there's definitely ways to kind of control that throttling as well. Does that?
Yeah, that makes sense to me too, Rich. And I think it's a great question. Hopefully that helps. Would love to talk to you about it more afterwards. If you want to ping us afterwards, our contact info will be up at the end of this too. So quick overview of some of the basic network concepts in GCP, again, because they're a little bit different from other cloud providers. So within a project is where you'd create your network, your VPC. So your VPC lives actually within one of those projects that we talked about earlier. And then within your VPC, you can have one or more regions and zones. So each region has one or more zones, and then your subnets live within your VPC, and these can span across different zones, all within that same region. Just a high-level overview.
Yeah, this is cool too. Just one thing really on quick, maybe you're going to get to the next slide, but again, a best practice that Google has is everyone's asked, well, you're supposed to create all these projects for your applications, but there's only one project for the VPC. Yeah, I see that you have it. Your star topology basically, is basically, again, another Google best practice. And one of the differentiators from Google Cloud, as you mentioned, Ed, that it's different from some of the other ones is that your subnets are able to span zones, whereas in the other clouds, as I was working with those, I realized that you can only have one, subnets cannot go across zones. You have to create an individual subnet per zone. So this helps with easier configuration for redundancy. But those were the two ones that I wanted to highlight. I figured, that was something for me that caught me a little off guard, is that you could link two projects together to have them share a network, or you have your one master kind of VPC project, and everything goes through that, and you have to configure subnets properly to route easier. Now, I'm getting into a little bit technical networky stuff, maybe a little deep diving. So I'll let you take it off from here.
No, actually, I'll talk a little bit more about what you nailed on one of the best practices that we'll come to in a second too. So this is a shared VPC that like Rich mentioned is a great capability within Google Cloud. It grossly simplifies cross-project traffic, and then also back to your on-premise as well if you have it hooked up to like a cloud VPN or an interconnect. So this way you can see, hey, which projects are on like the same subnet and which ones are on different projects, different subnets very easily. So shared VPC is one of the best practices that we recommend and Google recommends. It reduces management and topology complexity. Another one that Rich touched on is using custom subnets. So the ability of making sure that your subnets don't trip over each other from an IP space, and that's where custom subnets come into play. There's some other recommendations here around the use of fewer subnets, applying organization policies. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. I'll obviously consider the quota limitations like you would probably be experienced with from Azure and AWS as well. So high-level overview of some of the key networking considerations. And now we're going to go through kind of similar high-level overview of some of the key security considerations as well. So like with networking, it often starts with requirements, understanding what you need. We're going to talk about organization policies, cloud security console, and some kind of best practices here as well. So from a security requirements perspective, the likelihood is, it's difficult to tell from the polls, but the likelihood is that you probably already have one or more cloud workloads running somewhere else, likely AWS and or Azure. And so there's probably some precedence already. Doesn't mean that it's perfect, but there's probably some existing cloud security requirements. So whenever we're working with a new customer, this is where we start. We start with, all right, what are the existing cloud security requirements that you have for AWS and or Azure? Other places that we start with, what are your compliance and governance requirements? There's a question about HIPAA and FERPA projects that we'll probably come to at the end of this as well. It's a great example of like understanding, all right, there's some requirements around like, do you have PII, you're subject to HIPAA, other compliance needs here too. Relatedly, is there already a data classification policy? Are you classifying like confidential sensitive data versus non-sensitive data? Do you need to be able to connect? Do you need to be able to scan, discover, and classify your sensitive data? A lot of our customers will need to connect back to on-premise where they're running some of these tools from to scan their data regularly. Do you have any SIM, so security event management integration requirements? So any requirements to get your logs back into like a centralized SIM. So these are all ones that we typically start with when we're onboarding into GCP. Google provides some great tooling out of the box to be able to kind of hit the ground running with some best practices, one of which is the Google Cloud Security Command Center. So this one's going to scan your environment for certain best practices, security holes and threats and vulnerabilities. And so, for example, here we've got like security health analytics where it's telling us like, all right, hey, it found 184 open firewalls. We've got a number of public bucket ACLs. So, hey, we're like, are these, should they truly be public to the whole world or do they need locking down? So there's some more advanced functionality. Some of the functionality has now moved into a premium model for Security Command Center. Some of the more advanced functionality include like threat detection, anomaly detection as well. So here within the anomalies, it can help you around outgoing denial of service attacks, crypto mining. Actually, one of our this company we worked with last year, where they had accidentally committed to public GitHub like their security key, like their private key, and from there, so they realized, they pulled it down pretty much immediately afterwards, but it had been scraped in the couple of minutes that it had been up. And without knowing it, they get their bill at the end of the month, and it was for $90,000 of like high CPU, high GPU VMs that were running, that were crypto mining. So a number of lessons learned here. Obviously, making sure you sanitize your code before you commit it, and best practices around budgets and alerting, and then also having a tool in place like Security Command Center here to help you around like anomalies and catching those gaps. So just distilling it pretty quickly, we've got some top 3 best practices. So the first one here, VM access. The Google provides a capability called like OS login. So there's 2 main mechanisms of being able to connect to VMs. You can either use like SSH keys or use this OS login approach. And this is where it's going to link your Linux accounts with your Google Cloud Identity accounts. So for that seamless kind of single sign-on for your VMs. That obviously then provides 2FA and easy lifecycle management as well. You're not having to manage SSH keys. So service accounts is another good practice as well, where we recommend creating dedicated custom service accounts to have like custom roles and using the concept of least privilege for only exactly what they need and nothing more. So use those rather than the built-in service accounts for, say, Compute Engine and maybe Kubernetes Engine and maybe other ones. And then keys. So simplify your key management. Either use Google Cloud managed keys, so you're not having to manage like rotating keys and managing keys yourselves, or if you already have a third-party tool like HashiCorp, well, we recommend just plugging into that. And I talked about organization policies a few minutes ago. These are policies at the top level that are going to trickle down to all resources in your organization. Some great ones that we recommend starting with are locking down where resources can be created and running. So you know, hey, we're only running workloads in certain locations. Skipping the default network creation. So anytime a project is created, you're not going to create a default network and have tens, dozens, or hundreds, or even thousands of default networks out there. You're limiting it to just what you need, and probably more than likely using that shared VPC. Locking down external IPs of VM instances so you can easily centrally manage this, and then enforcing that OS login as well. So locking down access to not SSH keys, but using that OS login. Anything else that you'd add here, Rich, around security before I move on to operations?
The one thing I wanted to mention in relation just to the question really quickly about HIPAA and some of the PII was that there is auditing, a complete audit trail that can be turned on for every single Google resource. So whether it's a security change or a role change, you're going to get that, you're going to have a trail of those changes. Now, there's always the shared security module. Nothing is 100% that Google's going to cover you. You can easily unencrypt data and start pumping it out to the internet. And, you know, that's on you. No policy is going to put in place to stop you from doing that. But at the same time, they have a lot, you know, out of the box.
Absolutely. Actually, if we have time at the end, I can share some more on some of the logging and auditing that Google provides and the different types of login there. Another best practice around like HIPAA or FERPA projects is to separate them off into a different folder. So that way then in your folder structure that I showed earlier on, you've got your HIPAA projects kind of completely isolated off from other ones through the folder structure. So moving on to operations, one of my favorite topics as a DevOps evangelist. So making sure that you're ready from an operational readiness perspective for running production workloads. This includes like monitoring and logging, and I love geeking out on site reliability engineering. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then moving into incident management and integrating Google into your like existing incident management process and tooling. So we've got a very simple, but very easy for us to forget production readiness checklist that people will oftentimes they skip through and forget some of the key basics here. So making sure that you have monitoring in place. I'll talk more about the monitoring options in a minute. Making sure that you have logging in place. So the question around like the auditing of like audit trails for changes. So there's one of many examples of what logging you can have in place, both from like an application perspective and also like an authorization and or even authentication perspective as well. Incident management. So making sure that you have all the people, the process, and the tools in place for when something goes wrong, what's going to happen. So I like to start with like a major incident management workflow, making sure you have that in place so that, hey, when there's truly an outage, everybody knows who to call and what our process and procedure are for handling that. Integrating that into your ITSM tool, I'll talk about ServiceNow integration in a few minutes. Setting up service level objectives and service level indicators. I'll talk more about that in a minute too. And then having operational runbooks for, all right, if there's this issue, if this service has gone down or we're getting this error within Kubernetes, here's your runbook on how to troubleshoot that, folks. Along with like your standard operating procedures for what to do for your maintenance tasks and to keep everything alive and happy. So this is your checklist. Getting into some of the details, Google provides a fantastic tool formerly called Stackdriver. Now it's called Google Operations. This is where it's going to handle monitoring of VMs, those cloud services as well. It's great for like uptime checks as well. Plugs into a lot of major stacks that we have it ours plugged into. To Slack is a very common one. I'll talk about plugging it into ServiceNow in a minute. Logging, getting all your right logs set up. You can actually define metrics and alerts around logs as well. It's another great practice. It does like performance management, and it's multi-cloud as well. So if you happen to like Stackdriver or Google Operations so much, you could use it to manage like your AWS environment as well. Site reliability engineering is a concept that came out of Google maybe 10 years ago or more, and it's the idea of applying software engineering principles to systems. So we're focusing on making our systems more reliable and resilient, and then obviously doing so with our software too. Key starting point here is identifying those service level indicators. So these are things that are going to tell us like, is everything good or not good right now? So availability and latency are just two great low-hanging fruit. Once you've got those service level indicators in place, you can then build your service level objectives around these. So a great example that we always start with is, hey, we want 99% of our homepage requests. So we're saying what we want here, the homepage requests, what the time period is in the past 28 days, how fast we want, what our so this is our indicators of what our threshold is. So to be less than 100 milliseconds. So 99% of a homepage request in the past 28 days served up in less than 100 milliseconds. And then create visibility and alerts around these as well. Stackdriver will have allow you to build the alerts and dashboards on top of that too.
Yeah, and really quick, Ed, I just wanted to jump in. There's, again, some more out-of-the-box tools to help you do this, where you could set up your own metrics and levels to view all this, and then, trigger either alerts or automation based on that. There's also tools like the Health Monitor that, comes right out of the box and basically just tells you it continues to ping your servers, and, hey, if it notices the server is down or it's not getting a response, automatically just spins up a new one and puts it in its place. And that's, again, pretty easy to configure if, at the VM level, when you're talking about reliability engineering, high availability, business continuity, all that good stuff, right?
Exactly. One of the things that we're going to dig into more in automation in the next session. So from an integration perspective, we have, with our customers, like we'll often integrate Google Cloud Operations or Stackdriver into their ServiceNow. It's pretty straightforward to do. You set up like an alerting policy. You're going to add a notification to a webhook. We'll send this through afterwards as well, so you don't need to be taking rapid notes. So then it's going to send a webhook. It's going to send a webhook to ServiceNow. So on the ServiceNow side, you want to make sure you have set up like your import table for your to create the rows for the incidents that are coming in before they hit the incident table. Then you've got a transform map and business rules for what to do with this when it comes in. From here, we then have ServiceNow like page out to like something like Xmatters or PagerDuty. The key with a transform map is you're going to get a lot of data from Stackdriver, which is great because now you know exactly where to route it to, what fields to populate in ServiceNow as well, which is where that transform map comes into play. So these are just some of the key ones. Hey, you can map this back to an incident. If you capture like the external system incident ID, then you can automatically close your ServiceNow ticket when the incident's closed in Stackdriver, for example. We love geeking out on this, so let us know afterwards if you have more questions on this too. We've got our operations in place. Hey, we're ready to go, but we don't want to do it just one time. We want to make it very repeatable and very push button and easy to use. And so that's where automation comes into play. We're going to talk a lot more about automation in the next session. So we just want to cover some of the basics at a high level here. Maybe whet some appetites a little bit for the next session, and a shameless plug for the next session as well. So we're going to talk about the concept of infrastructure as code, and then how we apply that to project automation within Google. So we're big fans of automating all the things. We do a lot with Terraform. There's a lot of other automation tools out there. You can use CloudFormation templates in AWS. You can use Deployment Manager in Google Cloud, Ansible, various other ones. We're big fans of Terraform. It's not the right tool for all the jobs, but for infrastructure provisioning and doing infrastructure as code, it's phenomenal. So Terraform is essentially a way of writing a template or a blueprint in HashiCorp's language here, so it's very human readable. So you write this blueprint, and then you tell Terraform go, and Terraform will go and talk to the relevant APIs. In this case, we're going to go talk to the Google Cloud APIs and build whatever it is that you've defined in that template. So in this case, I'm building a simple network with a subnet here as well. This is in US Central. The details are all in this template. The beauty is because it's in code, we can check it into source control. We can version it. We can see who's making what changes. And hey, this is our documentation. I don't need to write a separate documentation for this. It's here, and it's a living, breathing document as well. So this is an example of using it for a network. You can use it for building projects in Google Cloud as well. So this is how we use it for building projects through automation. You can do so through org policies, or you can use it for organization policies as well. So our customers that we work with, we actually just made an organization policy change this morning and a role change. They updated their Terraform templates, and then they committed, boom, went out and updated them automatically, and everything's all tracked in code. And yeah, I actually think this might be an Azure policy, and this is a Google policy. So another benefit of using Terraform is it's cloud agnostic. You can build your policies for Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, all through Terraform.
And from what I've seen over the past few years, it feels like Terraform has really become almost a default, de facto standard, especially for greenfield projects. Almost everybody I know who's, starting to do that infrastructure as code, they want to keep it cloud agnostic because, nobody knows what the future is. So that's why it's a great technology everyone's leveraging. And yeah, I'm struggling actually to think of a project I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years that hasn't leveraged Terraform, out of the box.
Exactly. We do it for every project that we do at Burwood, includes Terraform. And you're right about it becoming the de facto. Much like how Kubernetes is a de facto for container orchestration, Terraform is very much a de facto for infrastructure as code. And so Rich and I talked about some of the benefits of infrastructure as code. With the versioning, the living, breathing documentation. Here's other ones that come from being able to use it with how you do Google Cloud. Like if you build a cloud landing zone with your project factory that I'll show you in a minute, you're going to get a reference architecture around like your governance and policy, your network configurations, security automation, all built into that code. So that code, that cloud landing zone is your project factory here. So anytime you provision a project, you've got your best practices around security and networking baked into it as well. In the next session, we'll dig deeper into Project Factory and some of the automation here. But in a nutshell, this is your push-button approach to building new projects. You can even integrate this with ServiceNow. So if somebody wanted to request a new project from a catalog item, then they can do so. There's a reference architecture around how we implement Terraform for all of our Google Cloud projects that we'll send through with the deck here as well. So there's going to be much more on automation in the next session. We're very excited to dig into that next session. It's going to be on August 5th. We're going to be talking about how to actually implement modernization. So that's what we have in the way of content. We'd love for questions that people have. If people want to hit the chat with questions here, we've got 6 minutes left, but we can also stay on longer as well if people have additional questions they want to cover up after 1 o'clock Eastern too.
Awesome, thanks, Ed. Yeah, like you said, feel free, everyone, to pop questions in chat or Q&A, or if you want to ask something live, there's a little hand raise icon. You're welcome to click that and we'll take you off mute. It's easier than typing, so just let us know. While we're waiting here, and I know you mentioned earlier, maybe you'd love to get into a little bit more on the monitoring logging and go into that a bit more. You mentioned earlier if we had a minute or so.
Oh yeah. The logging options within Google Cloud. Let me see if I can pull that up in the background here too. So we'll include that in the deck that we send through, but in a nutshell, there's logging around, like administrative logging around activities that happen from a security perspective. So these are the logs that you want to get into your, integrated into your SIM. So authentication logs, authorization logs, changes in roles, getting all of that, like access to your security team, integrated back into your SIM. Then there's networking logging, so you can turn on, say, like VPC flow logs and get all the good networking data into your logs as well. We're heavy. Rich and I are heavy on the app side as well, so we want to make sure that we get all of our like standard errors, standard outs, all of our application logs integrated into Stackdriver logging as well. There's a best practice around having like a logging project that we'll dig into a little bit more in the next session as well. And then that logging project, that's where you send all your logs into there, and then you can filter out what you want to send into your SIM, whether you're using Splunk or ArcSight or any other tools.
And to touch on the application side a little bit more, I know we're not too deep into that right now, and that's a little bit more for next session, but they do even have live debugging that if you plug into your log system as well, that you could actually debug your production code live, which is an interesting process, but it allows you to really turn around problems quickly. And just like Google Analytics or a lot of those other plug and play frameworks, you insert a few lines of code into your either SPA applications or into your cloud functions or lower level APIs, and spitting all those logs into a centralized location is again, it's really only a few lines of code, and you can spit all those logs then into BigQuery or some type of other big data repository to search through them. Actually, that's how Gmail works. It spits them into Bigtable, which is what all of all of Google's search capabilities and Google Maps run based on. So you're really leveraging the same technologies and frameworks that Google is using to power its own systems to do a lot of amazing search. I know I covered a lot of territory there, but there's just so many cool, technologies out there that Google provides.
That's one of the things that I love the most about Google Cloud is like, we are using all the same tools that Google uses internally to run these huge systems, right? Run Google Maps, run Gmail, and we get access to them. We get, anytime they provide new functionality internally, like it's not long before we get it. A lot of it is designed for a few key folks, right? Designed for developers to be extensible, very easy for us to build upon and integrate with. And then also, like, as an operations person, like I find Google Cloud like very intuitive for me to build and operate on. It has all the tooling there for me to create new infrastructure, manage it at scale as well. So yeah, many good reasons to love Google Cloud.
Absolutely.
I don't see any questions coming in, Colleen, and I'm not sure if anybody sees any hands raised.
I don't think so. And we have gotten a few questions to the HOSA, but they have all been, will you be sending the slides out? Which I will take as a good sign that you've got a good self-guided operation into Slideware here. So the answer to those questions is yes, absolutely. By Friday morning at latest, all of you on the call here will receive a copy of this deck, a link to our recording of this presentation on the YouTube channel, and then also your Grubhub credit for joining us today and sitting with us over lunch for this content. So yeah, as I said, I think we can wrap up here. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And please join us next time, August 5th, same time, 2 weeks from today, on implementing modernization. We're really going to get into how you plan, build, and automate to get modernization an integral part of your Google Cloud environment, supporting your apps and workloads. So please join us if you've been enjoying this content. With that, I will go ahead and wrap up. Thanks again for joining us. Reach out to us personally. You see Ed and Rich's email on there. They'd love to hear from you if you want to take any questions offline. And we'll call it a day. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, all.